And what we want to show you here is the Liberty transmission setup. Now, on most cars, regular cars that have a regular transmission in them, they have a regular cross member and a rubber or solid transmission mount. But on a Liberty 5-speed, like Pro Stock cars, we have it on a slide mount that's mounted on both sides. So that when you go to service a clutch and transmission, you could slide the transmission back very easily, and it slides right back, comes off. And then you could slide it back on and put it back into position. We had to do this a little bit differently than they do Pro Stock cars, because on Pro Stock cars, the chassis is so low, they can make a couple risers on each side and it'll lift the guides up. And the transmission is a lot easier to set up in place. But because of the NHRA rules and things that we have to do and the type of floor pan that we have on a Super Stock car, we had to actually notch the frame rail, and I also put a couple gussets on both sides of each tube to act as a support and give it a little bit more rigidity and finish it off a little nicer so that it doesn't get banged around when we put the transmission in and out. The slides are made out of 1¼ inch chromoly tubing that I cut in half. Then we line it up and set it in place and notch the tubing for that so that it would sit correctly in its location. And while doing that, we had to make sure that the transmission and the front of the motor is lined up to the back of the rear end housing on the pinion on center. And that's why you see that string that's through there. I also have a piece of solid round bar stock that I can actually bolt to the cradles in the motor where the crankshaft goes, and then it's machined where I can put a piece of tubing in it and slide it all the way back to the pinion and make sure it's on center. But because I had to take transmission in and out so many times fitting this thing, I just put the string in there and it worked out just fine. It's important to have the transmission and front of the motor lined up exactly to the center of the pinion so that the drive shaft runs in line, and that adds to more ETM mile an hour and less drag on the U-joints, and the car will work a whole lot better that way. The mount on a Liberty transmission that you see came from Rick Jones at RJ Race Cars. They perfected and built those things quite a bit, and it's just easier to buy one than me try to make one. And the thing fits perfect, comes in a kit, follow directions, it's very easy to do, and it was a big help in progressing this project along. The Rick Jones mounts allow us to slide the Liberty transmission up to the Brawell bell housing through the ram clutch and get it on centered perfect. It takes a lot of work and effort to do this type of stuff, but the end result, it's well worth your time when you're at the track and you're in the thrash, or you have to work on it properly and things just line up and go together perfectly. The string here incorporates a center line from where the crankshaft center is, and I use the center oiling hole from the camshaft to the crankshaft. And that'll go all the way through, and that directly lines up to the back of the pinion, so we know that every segment of the motor, transmission, and back of the pinion is perfectly in line where it needs to be. We also went off where the center line of the motor is going to be to the car through the jig, and that allows us to line everything up and get everything directly in line where it's supposed to be. What we've done here is we're incorporating a couple of things. This bar which attaches to the A-pillar post, which is welded all the way down here to the frame. We're incorporating this bar here, which starts here and goes all the way back to the 4-link chassis bracket and cross member. We're incorporating this bar here that'll bring the two of them together, which will bring a lot of rigidity to the front end on these cars, because this is a unibody front end. It's just stamped together at the factory. And what we're going to do is we're going to tie and weld this section in here to this frame rail and to this upper bar, which is tied into the A-pillar post bar. So it pulls the whole car together very nicely. And then from there we're going to put the motor plate, make the bracketry off of this for the motor plate for the front of the car. And it'll do a couple things there as far as helping the car with the front suspension and it'll keep everything tight and in line with where the upper control arms are located, because that is a weak part of these cars. So we're trying to do a lot of things here. We bring triangulating rigidity into the front end, plus we're incorporating the front motor plate into the rigidity of the front end of the car. Now we talked about that 14 7/8 dimension from the front of the motor to the core support. According to NHRA rules, they don't want any part of the motor or cylinder head touching the firewall. So we've got this thing back as far as we possibly can, according to NHRA rules, and it should satisfy them pretty good. It looks like it's back an awful lot, and it is, but it still fits within their road package that they're looking for. It's got the motor height correct on it in the front, and because these cars have such a short drive shaft tunnel in them from the factory on the stamped steel floor, it's difficult to get the motor height that you want and the transmission position correctly, because you got to be able to run a 4-inch aluminum drive shaft in these cars, keep them light. So all those things have to be taken into consideration when you're doing a build like this.
When you crashed the car, what inspired you to bury this car here in your backyard?
Gods, the car owned my whole place here. My car bought and paid for this whole place. It paid for some competition in the 3 or 4 years. It owned it, I didn't.
You ever have an inkling maybe to jump in a car and pull the gear shift a time or two?
Oh, of course. I'm still very skilled at mechanical things. Very skilled at machines. That's the reason I fly and aerobatics and ultralights and stuff like I do now, skydive. I mean, I'm still good at all that. I could do it with any of them right now if I wanted to dedicate all the time to it, but you know, with a family and a business, that's hard to say that you want to dedicate that to it. The only problem with old suckers like me is your reaction times can't compete with all these little young dumbs. So they automatically win on that. God gave that to them and he took it away from us.